Before us, another human species ruled the frozen lands of Europe. They hunted giant mammoths and survived below -20 degrees Celsius. Then they vanished, leaving only fossils and traces of DNA within us. Who were the Neanderthals? What wiped out the humans who conquered the Ice Age? To understand how Neanderthals survived for more than 300,000 years in the frozen landscapes of Europe, we must begin with one fundamental truth. They did not conquer the Ice Age. The Ice Age shaped them. For most of their existence, Neanderthals lived through relentless cycles of extreme cold. When temperatures across much of Europe were approximately 6 to 10 degrees Celsius lower than they are today. Vast grasslands repeatedly transformed into frozen steppes, winters stretched on for months, and the cold became the greatest force determining survival. Over hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection, their bodies gradually evolved to solve one overriding challenge: conserve heat and endure. The first thing that strikes anthropologists is the Neanderthal physique. A typical adult stood only about 1.64 to 1.68 meters tall, but weighed between 75 and 85 kilograms, supported by a thick skeleton and an exceptionally powerful muscular system. This is a classic example of Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule in biology. Animals living in cold climates tend to develop larger, more compact bodies and shorter limbs to reduce the amount of surface area exposed to the environment, minimizing heat loss. The same principle can still be observed today in polar bears, musk oxen, and Arctic foxes. If the body were compared to a container of hot water on a freezing winter day, a short, rounded container would retain heat far longer than one that is tall and slender. That advantage was also evident in their noticeably shorter arms and legs, compared with Homo sapiens. The limbs lose heat faster than any other part of the body, so shortening them allowed Neanderthals to conserve significantly more energy in an icy environment. While the ancestors of Homo sapiens evolved in Africa with tall, slender bodies and long limbs adapted for releasing heat, Neanderthals developed an almost opposite body plan. Another defining feature was their large nose. Once dismissed as a coarse facial characteristic, modern research using CT reconstructions and computational fluid dynamics has revealed that the Neanderthal nasal cavity functioned like a natural climate control system. Cold, dry air was warmed and humidified before reaching the lungs, helping protect the respiratory system from the strain of taking tens of thousands of breaths every day in temperatures below freezing. Their rib cage was also broader and deeper than that of modern humans. Modern metabolic models estimate that an adult Neanderthal required roughly 4,500 to 6,000 kilocalories each day, and that demand may have exceeded 6,500 kilocalories during winter or periods of intense hunting. Even their brains reflected this remarkable adaptation. The average Neanderthal brain measured approximately 1,450 to 1,600 cubic centimeters, matching or even exceeding the average size of the modern human brain. Brain size alone, however, does not indicate greater intelligence. Part of that larger volume was associated with their larger bodies and the increased demands of processing movement, vision, and sensory information in a harsh environment. What truly mattered was that they possessed more than enough cognitive ability to coordinate complex group hunts, craft sophisticated tools, memorize vast landscapes, and adapt to one of the most unforgiving ecosystems ever inhabited by humans. Yet this is where a paradox began to emerge. The more muscle the body carried and the better it became at conserving heat, the more energy it required simply to stay alive. They could not survive on a handful of seeds or sparse meals the way many later Homo sapiens communities eventually could. They were forced to hunt large game again and again. Their greatest battle, therefore, was never simply against the cold itself. It was against the gigantic animals of the Ice Age, fighting for every meal and every additional day of survival. Their battlefield was the Mammoth Steppe, a vast cold grassland ecosystem stretching from Western Europe to Siberia. This was not a land buried under ice and snow as many people imagine, but a dry, freezing steppe inhabited by woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, ancient bison, wild horses, and reindeer. These herds of giant animals sustained Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. Their diet contained a very high amount of animal protein, placing them near the top of the food chain, alongside wolves and cave hyenas. This overturns the old idea that Neanderthals were merely scavengers feeding on animal carcasses. Among their prey, reindeer were the most stable food source. At many sites in France, Germany, and Belgium, reindeer bones make up the majority of animal remains found, showing that they did not hunt randomly but relied on experience accumulated and passed down through generations. But nature was not always generous. When reindeer herds changed their migration routes or winters lasted longer, Neanderthals had to face animals far more dangerous. An ancient bison could weigh nearly a ton. A woolly rhinoceros could weigh 2 to 3 tons, with a horn powerful enough to throw any predator into the air. And a woolly mammoth could exceed 6 tons. How could a group of people armed only with stone-tipped spears bring down such giants? Neanderthals knew how to use terrain to reduce risk. They hunted near ravines, steep riverbanks, or narrow points along migration routes, where prey had difficulty turning or escaping. In the past, many scientists believed Neanderthals drove entire herds over cliffs. However, more recent studies are more cautious and suggest that the evidence is not strong enough to confirm this scenario. Their weapons also reflected that strategy. Mousterian spears with stone tips made through the levelos technique were mainly designed for close-range thrusting, not long-distance throwing like the spears of later Homo sapiens. A large animal not only provided hundreds of kilograms of meat, but also offered the most valuable source of energy in the Ice Age. Fat. In a freezing environment, fat produces more than twice as much energy per gram as protein and was essential fuel for maintaining body heat. Neanderthals also extracted fat-rich marrow. In some places, there is even evidence that they heated bones to recover the remaining fat inside. But what is fascinating is that the value of prey did not end with food. After the meat and fat were shared, the hides, tendons, and bones became the materials that helped the entire community survive the winter. Neanderthals transformed the outcome of every hunt into clothing, tools, and other survival technologies. From this point on, the story was no longer just about hunting. It became the story of how they turned nature into an ally, allowing them to survive for more than 300,000 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Bringing down a mammoth or a bison was only the beginning. The real battle for Neanderthals began after the hunt. In the middle of the Ice Age, when temperatures often dropped below -20 degrees Celsius, meat could only keep them alive for a few more days. To survive through long winters, they had to preserve warmth. Animal hides, animal fat, and fire were the three foundations that shaped Neanderthal survival technology for more than 300,000 years. The first precious resource was animal hide. More than 100,000 years ago, there were no woven fabrics or clothing like we have today. If the body lost heat too quickly, hypothermia could take a life within just a few hours. That made every hide valuable. Reindeer or wild horse hides were enough for basic protection. But in the coldest regions, the thick fur of bison, cave bears, or young mammoths retained heat far better. Neanderthals did not simply drape animal skins over their bodies, but knew how to clean them, scrape away fat and tendons, and make the hides durable, flexible, and usable for longer periods. But warm clothing solved only half the problem. For the body to keep generating heat, they needed an enormous source of energy. And in a frozen environment, fat mattered even more than meat. Protein helps build muscle, but if a person eats only lean meat for a long time without enough fat, the body can still collapse. This condition was once recorded among Arctic hunting communities and is known as rabbit starvation, when the body has too much protein but not enough energy. Neanderthals seem to have understood this through direct experience. After removing the meat, they also smashed long bones open to extract fat-rich marrow. In their world, every gram of fat could decide survival. The final and most important element was fire. Today, most scientists agree that Neanderthals controlled and used fire with great skill. Fire was not only for warmth, it helped cook food, made meat and plants easier to digest, and reduced the energy the body had to spend on eating. Fire also helped dry animal hides, repair hunting spears, craft tools, and drive away predators. Many archaeological sites show that hearths were placed in very stable locations, proving that Neanderthals knew how to organize their living spaces with intention and planning. When we put all these pieces together, we realize that Neanderthals built an entire survival system. Hunting the right prey, using every hide, extracting every gram of fat, and keeping the fire alive as the heart of the community. And it is precisely when studying the tools they left behind that scientists discovered an even more surprising truth. Neanderthals did not simply use technology to survive. They continuously improved that technology. If animal hides, fat, and fire were the foundations that helped Neanderthals survive in the cold, then an even greater question remains. How did they maintain that way of life for more than 300,000 years? The answer does not lie in muscle, but in intelligence. To hunt large animals, keep fire alive through winter, and craft weapons strong enough to last, they needed more than instinct. They needed the ability to plan, experiment, and pass experience down. That is why growing archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals were not primitive humans, but among the first engineers of the Ice Age. The clearest evidence is the Mousterian stone industry, found across Europe and Western Asia. Their tools may look simple at first glance, but the way they were made was highly sophisticated. Instead of striking stone at random, Neanderthals used the Levallois technique to prepare a stone core before removing a flake whose size and shape had almost been planned from the beginning. This required the toolmaker to imagine the final product in advance, and then carry out each step in the correct sequence. Neanderthals favored flint, chert, or quartzite because they produced sharper and more durable cutting edges. At many sites in France, Germany, and Belgium, archaeologists have traced the origins of these stones to sources dozens of kilometers away from where Neanderthals lived. Stone points were attached to wooden shafts, tied with animal tendons or plant fibers, and fixed in place with adhesive. Each component had its own function, but when combined, they created a spear strong enough to face bison, rhinoceroses, or mammoths. This is one of the earliest examples of composite tools in human history. What especially impresses scientists is that Neanderthals knew how to make birch bark tar roughly 200,000 years ago. This adhesive could not appear simply by throwing bark into a fire. To create it, birch bark had to be heated in low oxygen conditions, with a temperature controlled steadily enough for the resin to separate instead of burning into ash. Another example often mentioned is the Schöningen wooden spears in Germany, dating to roughly 300,000 years ago. Although they most likely belong to Homo heidelbergensis, a very close ancestor of Neanderthals, and cannot yet be confirmed as tools made by Neanderthals themselves, they reflect the technical level of the evolutionary line that led to them. These spears, more than 2 meters long, were balanced with a center of gravity similar to modern throwing javelins, helping increase accuracy and thrusting force. This shows that weapon making was based on experience accumulated over many generations, not chance. If such complex skills were maintained for hundreds of thousands of years, there must have been a way to transmit knowledge between generations. And that is the key that opens the next part. How did Neanderthals communicate, care for one another, and build communities capable of preserving their culture across thousands of generations? Everything had to be learned from those who came before. And this is reflected in the astonishing consistency of Mousterian tools across many sites in France, Germany, Belgium, and Spain over tens of thousands of years. Such complex techniques could only have been maintained through observation, guidance, and teaching between generations. This shows that Neanderthals had more than instinct. They possessed a culture capable of preserving knowledge. Studies suggest that Neanderthals usually lived in groups of about 10 to 30 individuals. This size was small enough to move with animal herds, but large enough to hunt, share food, and protect one another. The most moving evidence comes from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. There, archaeologists discovered Shanidar I, a man who had suffered a broken arm, a leg injury, skull trauma, and possibly the loss of vision in one eye. Despite carrying many serious injuries, he lived for many more years. In a world where every meal had to be won through dangerous hunts, that would have been almost impossible without care from the community. Another case is La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France. This individual lived to around 40 to 50 years old, which was quite old for prehistoric times, even though he had lost almost all of his teeth. A person who could not chew tough food would have had great difficulty surviving alone. It is highly likely that members of his group prepared softer food or helped him with daily life. This shows that Neanderthal communities did not value only the strong, but also cared for the old and the weak. A society like that could not exist without communication. For many years, people believed Neanderthals only produced simple sounds. However, recent studies have changed this view. Fossils from Kibara Cave show that their hyoid bone was almost identical to that of modern humans, an important structure involved in speech. Although we still cannot confirm that Neanderthals had language as complex as Homo sapiens, most scientists today agree that they very likely possessed a communication system developed enough to plan hunts, teach skills, and organize community life. When combined with evidence of technology and mutual care, the picture of Neanderthals becomes completely different from what we once imagined. What is worth noting is that none of these actions directly made them stronger or faster. They spent time raising children, caring for the elderly, and supporting the injured. Activities that consumed resources, yet helped the entire community preserve knowledge and remain connected across generations. That is also one of the most important foundations of human society. If technology helped Neanderthals master nature, and community spirit helped them endure the Ice Age, then their most astonishing leap appeared when they began doing things that did not directly help them survive. They spent time on activities that did not bring in more food, did not protect them better from the cold, and did not make hunting easier. One of the clearest pieces of evidence comes from eagle talons discovered at sites such as Krapina in Croatia, Cova Foradada in Spain, and many other locations in France and Italy. On these talons, archaeologists found very precise cut marks made by stone tools. What is especially remarkable is that under a microscope, many of them also show wear patterns suggesting they may once have been strung into necklaces or attached to clothing. Around 130,000 years ago, Neanderthals may have worn these talons as ornaments or as symbols of status, courage, or personal identity. In many caves across the Iberian Peninsula, Neanderthals collected red ochre, manganese, and other color-producing minerals. These were not food, and they were not suitable for making tools. A groundbreaking discovery published in 2018 changed how we see them even further. Using uranium-thorium dating, scientists determined that some paintings in the caves of La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales in Spain were more than 64,000 years old. At that time, Homo sapiens had not yet appeared in Western Europe. Perhaps the most mysterious example is Bruniquel Cave in southern France. More than 300 meters from the cave entrance, in total darkness, archaeologists discovered over 400 broken pieces of stalagmite arranged deliberately into circular structures. Burn marks show that Neanderthals brought fire into this place around 176,000 years ago. What is striking is that the area shows no signs of hunting or long-term habitation. To this day, no one knows exactly what this construction was for. It may have been a gathering place, a site for communal ritual, or something carrying a symbolic meaning that has been lost to time. Another subject that has reshaped scientific thinking is how Neanderthals treated the dead. At La Chapelle aux Saints in France, Shanidar in Iraq, and Teshik Tash in Uzbekistan, many skeletons have been found in pits that appear to have been prepared in advance. When all these pieces of evidence are brought together, from eagle talons, red pigments, and the mysterious structures inside Bruniquel Cave to the burial of the dead, the image of Neanderthals becomes completely different. The distance between Neanderthals and us, therefore, becomes smaller than ever. They were not only hunters of the Ice Age, but humans capable of reflection, creativity, and the search for meaning beyond the struggle against nature. And yet, just as they reached the height of their adaptive and cultural abilities, history suddenly changed direction. After more than 300,000 years of existence in Europe, Neanderthals began to disappear. And the true cause of that disappearance turned out to be far more complex than the familiar idea that they were simply replaced by Homo sapiens. For decades, people believed they were defeated by Homo sapiens in direct competition. But new research in archaeology, genetics, and paleoclimate shows that the story was far more complex. Neanderthals did not disappear because of a single cause, but because many factors happened at the same time, right when they had become most vulnerable. The first factor was climate. The irony is that Neanderthals were never defeated by the cold. Across more than 300,000 years of existence, they had survived many harsh glacial periods. What truly threatened them was environmental change that happened too quickly. From around 70,000 to 40,000 years ago, Europe repeatedly experienced major climate fluctuations, such as the Dansgaard-Oeschger and Heinrich events. Within only a few decades, temperatures could shift by as much as 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. Grasslands turned into forests, then back again into steppe or frozen terrain. As the environment changed, reindeer, wild horses, and bison also altered their migration routes, making hunting knowledge accumulated over many generations less effective. Another serious problem lay within their own genome. Ancient DNA shows that the final Neanderthal populations were very small and scattered across a vast region. Research on Chagirskaya Cave in Siberia suggests that some communities consisted of only a few dozen reproductive individuals. Small population size made inbreeding more frequent, reducing genetic diversity and allowing harmful genetic variants to accumulate. At the same time, small groups also had great difficulty recovering from disasters such as harsh winters, disease, or hunting accidents. Contrary to the image of brutal wars often shown in movies, archaeology has not yet found evidence of a war of extermination between the two species. What is more likely is long-term competition for resources. Both hunted large animals across the same landscapes. When food sources had already become unstable because of climate, having to share them with another highly effective predator placed increasing pressure on Neanderthals. In addition, Homo sapiens had the advantage of broader social networks. Modern human groups often exchanged tools, materials, and connections over long distances, helping them recover more quickly from crises. Meanwhile, small and isolated Neanderthal groups became increasingly vulnerable to separation. The disappearance of Neanderthals also did not happen at the same time across Europe. As living conditions became more difficult, they gradually retreated into more favorable climatic regions, such as the Iberian Peninsula, southern France, Italy, and the Balkans. These communities were like the final embers left behind as a great fire slowly faded. They continued to exist for several thousand more years, but their numbers grew smaller and their connections with one another gradually weakened. According to current evidence, the last Neanderthal populations disappeared around 40,000 years ago. But the story was not yet over. Neanderthals may have vanished as a separate species, but they never truly left history. When scientists began decoding ancient DNA, they discovered a startling truth. A part of Neanderthals is still alive inside the bodies of billions of people today. Around 50,000 to 45,000 years ago, the evolutionary history of humanity entered a chapter unlike anything before. For the first time, after hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution, two intelligent human species existed on the same continent. On one side were the Neanderthals, inhabitants, who had mastered Europe for more than 300,000 years. On the other were Homo sapiens, people who had just left Africa, carrying new technologies, broader social networks, and the ability for rapid cultural innovation. Archaeological sites show that the two species lived in many regions of Europe and Western Asia at the same time for thousands of years. That almost certainly means they encountered one another many times. Perhaps they followed the same herd of reindeer, came to the same river during salmon season, or simply watched each other silently from a distance. They differed in appearance, but both knew how to use fire, make tools, and hunt the same prey. The major turning point came in 2010, when the team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo published the first Neanderthal genome. The results showed that most modern humans with ancestry outside Africa carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That could only have happened if Homo sapiens and Neanderthals had children together, and if those hybrid generations continued passing that DNA down through tens of thousands of years. Another discovery came in 2018 from a small bone fragment found in Denisova Cave in Siberia. Scientists identified a girl about 13 years old whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan, another ancient human group in Asia. The girl, known as Deni, became the first direct evidence that ancient human groups were not completely separate. What is fascinating is that the legacy of those encounters still exists inside our bodies. Many segments of Neanderthal DNA helped Homo sapiens ancestors adapt to new environments, especially genes related to the immune system, skin, and hair. Neanderthals were not a failed species replaced by a stronger one. They were a human branch that successfully adapted to the European environment for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo sapiens, by contrast, increasingly relied on culture and the ability to innovate. When the climate changed, they improved tools, clothing, and expanded exchange networks with other communities. Both evolutionary paths were effective, but in a world that kept changing, the speed of cultural innovation provided the greater advantage. Neanderthals were not a failed branch of human evolution. They were proof of humanity's extraordinary ability to adapt to some of the harshest environments on Earth. And that reveals perhaps the most beautiful paradox of evolution. The human species once believed to have vanished is still present within every cell of our bodies. The legacy of the Neanderthals extends far beyond our DNA. More importantly, they forced science to rewrite the very definition of what it means to be human. Thank you for staying with WUFO Space until the very end of this journey through the vast universe. If you found this video interesting and insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WUFO Space so you won't miss our next cosmic adventures. Your support means the world to us and fuels our passion to keep exploring the wonders beyond.